Question one, I still can't.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, solar is a UK success story with over 99% of the UK solar PV capacity deployed since May 2010, totalling almost 14 gigawatts, enough to power over 3 million homes. And as the government's British energy security strategy sets out, we want to see a five-fold increase in deployment by 2035.
I still can't.
The government's British energy security strategy sets out a very ambitious aim to grow solar capacity 5 times by 2035. Yet we know that Xinjiang produces about 45% of the world's supply of the key components used in solar panel polysilicon. Despite raising this issue countless times, my call have languished as the government continued to import goods used forced Uyghur labour. So can the Minister set out what steps he is taking to ensure the expansion of solar capacity in the UK is not tainted with the ongoing Uyghur genocide?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman raises a very important point, and he will know that the government is, of course, deeply concerned by reports of this forced labour and the impact on the global solar panel supply chain as well. He will know that last year we announced robust measures to ensure that no UK organisations are complicit in this, and these measures are now being realised, and they include strengthening the overseas business risk guidance and, of course, introducing financial penalties under the Modern Slavery Act. He will also know that the UK's main solar industry trade association, Solar Energy UK, is leading the industry's response through a whole range of measures.
That's great.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to no one in my determination to seize net zero by 2050. But will the Secretary of State not agree with me that the right place for solar is on buildings, in domestic buildings, as the question suggests, and across the nation? But what we don't want to see are hundreds of acres of prime agricultural land, such as we're seeing in Wiltshire, currently threatened by vast and unplanned solar farms, which the people simply don't want to see there, particularly post-Ukraine.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we want to see an expansion of renewables across the country, but I would just point him to the energy security strategy, which sets out our plan on ensuring that we are seeing more rooftop solar, not just on commercial buildings, but also on public sector property.
We now come to Shadow Minister Dr. Alan Whitehead.
The President does indeed acknowledge the tremendous contribution that solar has made and can make to the achievement of our net zero goals. And also I'm sure he acknowledges it's now one of the cheapest and most quickly installed of renewables. So why is the government ignoring its future development, having devastated the industry a few years back by precipitously withdrawing all support for development and now doing nothing to ease the penal planning restrictions on both domestic and ground-mounted solar installations? The President says merely that he expects installations to increase fivefold by 2035, but without any support to allow that expectation to become a reality. Isn't it time that the government took the contribution of solar can make to net zero targets seriously?
Well, Mr. Speaker, respectfully, I disagree with him. I mean, the government is doing an enormous amount on this issue. In the latest CFD auction process, solar is back in. He will know that we've already removed VAT on solar panels to allow installations of residential accommodation. And if he looks at the detail of what's been set out in the energy security strategy, he will see there is going to be a big focus on solar, on wind, and of course nuclear as well.
Caroline Anson.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 2 and 7 together. COP26 was the first such conferences with a significant presence from the private sector, as well as key corporate commitments to tackle climate change. For example, over 7,000 international companies have signed up to the Race to Zero campaign, committing them to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the Met Office, my beautiful constituency of Eastbourne has held the record for sunshine hours recorded in a month since 1911. Arguably, we should be leading the nation in harnessing solar power. To your earlier point, or to his earlier point, we don't have land readily available locally, but we do have, courtesy of 3 commercial and retail parks, acres of rooftops. Can I ask my right honourable friend what work he is doing, and with other departments, to promote feasibility studies to identify untapped potential for solar generation and to promote financial incentives so local businesses in my town can play their part in tackling climate change?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raised a very important point, and she does indeed have a very beautiful constituency, well worth a visit. She makes a vital point about rooftop solar, and she will know through the energy security strategy that our plan for rooftop solar is to radically simplify planning processes with a consultation on relevant permitted development rights to help support deployment of rooftop solar on commercial premises. And I said we'll also consider the best way to make use of public sector roofs.
David Simmons.
Number 7, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Apologies for the misunderstanding. Local energy companies are often well placed to support small and medium-sized enterprises with the transition to net zero, and local authorities, with their insight into the opportunities for things like solar locally, are best placed to help with that. What assessment has the President made of the opportunities that this model may afford?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight the role of local energy companies in helping that transition to net zero through the provision of renewable energy. And as an example, I mean, close to my own constituency, we have Reading Hydro. It's a community-financed, built and operated hydro plant, and it's supplying renewable electricity to local business. And of course, I'd be very happy to meet with him, as would the Energy Minister, to discuss this matter further.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it truth that what business has learnt about this government is that it is entirely inconsistent in what it says today compared to what it says tomorrow? And the example of the Minister talking about solar, when only a few years ago the government were cutting feed-in tariffs, which decimated the industry. Isn't what we really need, and isn't what business needs, to know that they have a government with a strategic plan like the Green New Deal that the Labour Party has been talking about, that they can actually make long-term investments, and know the government's going to say tomorrow what it says today?
Mr. Speaker, could I just remind the honourable gentleman that we have published a net zero strategy which clearly sets out our long-term plans to create hundreds of thousands of extra jobs, green jobs, get many billions of pounds of private investment in. And I just say to him, one of the reasons that we are not reliant on Russian hydrocarbons is because over the last 10 years we have built the second biggest offshore wind sector in the world, and we want to quintuple the size of that.
Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only net zero that really matters is the one for planet Earth as a whole. So would he agree with me that there is a real potential that we could shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to energy-intensive industries in this country? I'm thinking about croppers, paper manufacturer in my constituency who make the paper for the poppies, for Hansard paper, but also paper with medical and military applications. If we tax them too much, if we allow their bills to be so high that they go out of business, all we'll do is export their carbon emissions to other countries. So will he talk to his friend the Energy Secretary so we have help for our energy-intensive industries to be able to support us in the long run?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he will know the government is providing support to energy-intensive industries to help them decarbonise. And he will also know through the COP26 process we have the Breakthroughs Agenda, where we are working globally on seeing how we can decarbonise some of the most difficult sectors as well. And so there is a global plan as well as a domestic plan on this.
Trees and Phillips.
Will the President work with the agriculture sector in pursuing his COP goals? Because we have some of the most sustainable farming practices in use anywhere in the world, and many farmers and growers who want to go further in playing their part in protecting nature and safeguarding the climate.
Quite right.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that my right honourable friend has raised an important point, and the Secretary of State for DEFRA and his ministers are, of course, working on this. But again, at an international level, we are looking to start an agriculture breakthrough as well, so that we can have a global focus on this issue.
SNP spokesperson Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Facebook promoted ads which contained outright climate falsehoods and scepticism during COP26, and it's reported fossil fuel companies and lobbying groups spent an estimated $574,000 on Facebook ads during the summit, resulting in more than 22 million impressions, many of these directly aimed at undermining efforts to achieve climate progress. Would the President agree the best way such businesses could help in the fight against climate change is to put the planet before their profits and come down hard on the climate naysayers? And can he tell us what actions he's been taking to address this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, one thing I would say to you is that we saw at COP26 the business community for, I think, probably the first time at a COP coming together in force and making commitments to tackle climate change. They, of course, now need to deliver on those. On the Pacific issue that she raises, happily write to her separately.
Steve Bryan.
Question number 3, please, sir.
President.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 12 together. Countries made significant commitments at COP26 on emissions reductions, on finance to support developing nations, on adaptation, loss and damage. We are continuing to press countries to deliver on their promises, and together with the COP27 presidency, Egypt, I'll be co-chairing a meeting of a representative group of ministers from around the world next month, hosted by the Danish government, to take stock of progress on delivery of the Glasgow Climate Pact.
Steve Bryan.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for coming to Winchester early this month to my Ask the Minister session, which was attended by hundreds of my constituents and school children from many schools across the patch, including Peter Symonds College, and for answering their questions so elegantly and openly. I'm sure he would agree that the young people that were there from those schools were so positive and care so much and are searching questions as they should, but are also very optimistic about this presidency and about this whole agenda. What more can we do to empower them, to make them really be able to push forward this agenda during our presidency year?
Mr. Speaker, I very much enjoyed my visit to Winchester, and may I commend my honourable friend for all the work he does in his local community. And of course, we had some excellent questions from the very many young people who were at the event, and they were positive as well in their outlook. I would just point out to him that in the planning for COP26 and in the country visits that I continue to make, listening to the views of young people has been absolutely invaluable, and indeed it's why in the Glasgow Climate Pact we have urged countries to actively involve young people in climate change processes.
Scott Benson.
Question number 12, Mr. As the Minister knows, the UK accounts for only 1% of global CO2 emissions, yet the steps we are taking to combat climate change will cost businesses and the government untold billions. Does the Minister agree that whilst the UK does what is perceived to be the right thing, it is highly likely that other nations will miss climate targets and that the enormous expense and impact upon our own economic competitiveness will all be in vain?
Mr. Speaker, tackling climate change is the right thing to do. It's also economically the smart thing to do. It's why at COP26 we had $130 trillion of private sector money signed up to net zero. It's why as a presidency we've managed to persuade 90% of the global GDP to sign up to net zero. It's why our net zero strategy talks about many hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of pounds of inward investments. He talks about costs. I just say to my honourable friend, look at what the OBR estimates as the unmitigated cost of climate change, almost 300% debt to GDP by the end of the century. And I know he's a fiscally responsible Conservative as I am, and he would not want to burden future generations with this level of debt.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will, of course, know that one of the reasons why Britain's emissions are so low now is because we've exported most of our filthy, polluting manufacturing industries to poorer nations of the world. So those countries have been polluted in order to provide for our lifestyle. But it's almost 9 years now since world leaders agreed to establish a climate change impacts loss and damage mechanism. Last year, the Scottish Government led the world in committing millions of pounds to that mechanism. When does the United Kingdom Government intend to follow Scotland's lead?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will know, that at COP26 we agreed the Glasgow Dialogue on Loss and Damage. First time we had significant text in the cover decision on this issue. That work is going forward, as is work on the operationalisation of the Santiago network.
Mr. Speaker, of course, as we urgently seek to combat climate change, it's vital that we do so in a just and fair way, particularly for communities in the north east of Scotland. So bearing that in mind, does he agree with me that his government should do 3 things? Firstly, fund the Acorn carbon capture underground storage project. Secondly, match fund the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund. And thirdly, finally, eventually, reform the Tenuos grid charging scandal that is happening at this moment in time.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has eloquently raised a number of domestic policy issues, and I know that the Energy Minister would be happy to write to him on all of them.
Shadow President Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the recent IPCC climate assessment was deeply worrying. It says current global policies would lead to warming of over 3 degrees, but it offered hope in the dramatic fall in the price of renewables, which means it's now the right choice for cheap energy and to tackle the climate crisis. Given onshore wind is the cheapest, cleanest, quickest power to deliver and is also supported by large majorities of the public in the UK, can the President explain why the government persists, including in its recent strategy, with planning policies that effectively block onshore wind in England?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly agree that we need to be doing more in terms of renewables, and that's what the energy security strategy is all about. We already have 14 gigawatts deployed across the country. There is another 5.8 which is consented in the pipeline. And with regard to future developments, what we have said is that we want to work in partnership with supportive communities to host these new onshore wind farms, and in return they will enjoy the benefits such as local energy discounts.
He knows, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister caved in to those who said they wanted to block onshore wind, and I think the Energy Minister knows it too. Let's try him on another. To tackle the cost of living crisis and the climate emergency, energy efficiency measures are a no-brainer. But the Chancellor steadfastly refused to offer a penny more for energy efficiency in the recent strategy, meaning higher bills for people and more people in fuel poverty. Now, the President is responsible for holding departments to account for net zero. Isn't it time, Mr. Speaker, for him to wield some presidential power, knock heads together and sort this problem out?
Mr. Speaker, the issue of cost of living obviously is facing very many families across the country in all of our constituencies, and that's why the government has put forward over £9 billion worth of support on the cost of living issue. With relation specifically to energy efficiency, he knows that we're investing over £6.6 billion over this Parliament to improve energy efficiency and decarbonise heat, and of course that will lead to lower bills, particularly for those most in need.
Duncan